Alrighty, so we're going to pick up and look at the notes from yesterday and today. So yesterday, all we really did was we went over and talked about this political cartoon. So political cartoons are a great primary source for examining the mood and atmosphere of a particular time because they really give you a sense of what it is that people were reading and looking at and thinking about and finding important at the time. So as we look at this cartoon is known as the rail splitter at work repairing the Union. And you have these two figures here, Uncle Abe and Andy. Uncle Abe is obviously Abraham Lincoln. And notice he has this large piece of wood that is a split rail. Abraham Lincoln used to make split rail fences, the kind of stuff you would see like in Old World, Wisconsin. They have like cut beams that they make into fencing around a property line. And Andrew Johnson, who was Lincoln's second vice president when he was reelected in 1864, is up here on top of this ball that represents the United States. And Lincoln, now notice there's a crack in the ball, and Lincoln is putting it back together while Andy sews it up. Andrew Johnson was a tailor before entering politics. So these two sort of like background pieces of information that Lincoln used to make split rail fencing and that Johnson was a tailor would have been things that the people at the time would have been aware of. And if you look at what it says here, so it says, "Take it quietly, Uncle Abe, and I will draw it closer than ever. A few more stitches, Andy, and the good old Union will be mended." It really does give a very optimistic view that they're going to put the Union back together. And the interesting thing here, too, is if you read the way that this is phrased, take it quietly. Let's not make a big fuss of it. And the Union will be back stronger than it was before. And all it's going to take is a few more little pieces of work, and the Union will be mended and right back to the way that it was. It's a really sort of optimistic view of what I think many Americans probably hoped was going to happen when the war was over in both North and South. Now, another thing to keep in mind here, and this is just an analytical perspective of looking at it, we know, even though that there's no like frame of reference given to us as far as like where this appeared and what time, there's a few things we can say about it definitively. This political cartoon had to have occurred while the war was still going on. How do we know that? Because Lincoln died before the war ended, and Lincoln's obviously alive here. Now, it also must take place sometime between, say, the time period of really late 1864. My guess is going to be sometime in December 1864 to early April of 1865. In that 4 to 5 month period, Johnson was not Lincoln's first vice president, so it can't be before 1864. That distinction, by the way, goes to the immortal Hannibal Hamlin. Yeah. So it's probably got to occur sometime after the election results were in. So that's why I'm guessing you're looking at like late December, early January to April, because Lincoln was killed on April the 14th. So this political cartoon really gives us a look at, in a small snippet, a view of like an optimistic outlook for what was going to happen after the war was over. The sad thing is that optimistic outlook is not necessarily what reality was. So what we're talking about here is a time period called the Reconstruction. Now, to be really super technical, it's hard to pin when you want to say Reconstruction begins. We can definitively say when it ends, but saying when it begins really depends on your point of view. I'm taking it from the perspective of Reconstruction really starts with the announcement of Lincoln's Reconstruction plan at the end of the war. So we're looking at a time period in the way that I'm going to present this from roughly April of 1865 until March of 1877. So it's literally almost 12 full years. If you want a really simplistic definition of Reconstruction, it's roughly the decade that follows after the Civil War. And remember that a decade is a 10-year period. So in order to understand Reconstruction, the first thing we have to look at is Reconstruction is an effort to recover from the 4 years of the war. Okay, the Civil War lasted from 1861 to 1865. And from the very beginning, it was Lincoln's intention, remember, to go back to the original view of the founding fathers, with what the founders had intended in the statements in the Declaration of Independence, what they had set up in the Constitution, and the overall belief that slavery would die out and should be allowed to die a natural death. That was not going to happen. Now, it's also safe to say that Lincoln's view about the intent of the founders is that the Constitution held the country together and that it was not easily dissolvable. And as a result of this, it was necessary to put the country back together. So Lincoln came up with something that he called the 10% plan. It was really super simple and very straightforward. So when 10% of the population of a southern state took an oath of loyalty to the Constitution, the state was admitted back in. So what the heck am I even talking about here? Because some of you are like, I don't understand the thing he just said. So let me try to make this very clear. The southern states that revolted had left the Union to some degree or another. Now, whether they could legally or legitimately do that, let's not look at that point. Let's just look at this. They left the Union. They need to be let back in. A sort of analogy would be as if you walk out of a room and the door is locked and somebody's got to let you back in. Well, there might be certain qualifications to get back in the room. In this case, it's back into the country. Lincoln's qualification was super simple. You abolish slavery, and 10% of your state's population takes an oath of loyalty to the Constitution. Then you're right back in. The idea behind this is a quick and simple reunion plan. For Lincoln, and probably in all honesty, for the best of the nation, it was absolutely vital that the country move past the war and get on the business with healing. You just have to let the situation go. It's sort of like the country was the parents and the states are the kids, and the kids and the parents had a fight. But now it's time for the kids to apologize, the parents to accept the apology, and we start back over again. Easy squeezy lemon peasy. This was Lincoln's plan. Now, this is all fine and dandy, except for the fact that Lincoln done got himself killed dead. And that made his plan a little bit more difficult to follow. Because what ends up happening here is that you have two very different views about the Reconstruction. Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's vice president, who then became president, number 17, if you're keeping track at home of our numbers, after Lincoln's death. Johnson was a Southerner. He was from Tennessee. And not only was he a Southerner, he was a Southern Democrat. He was, in fact, the only Southern Democrat to not leave Congress during the war. That's why he was chosen to be Lincoln's running mate, because it was the idea of creating this Union Party that would sort of represent the two sides coming together, North and South, Democrat and Republican, everybody working together to restore the Union. So it really was about unity. And Johnson, being a Southerner, was all in favor of Lincoln's quick and easy, simple plan. Congress, on the other hand, did not favor this because Congress was controlled by the Republicans, the Northern Republicans. And to be fair, there were no Republicans in the South elected at that time. So Northern Republicans looked at it that the South left. It's not just, you can't just come back, you left. You have to really pay a penalty for this. And because you, as in you, the South, caused the war, you need to be punished. So Johnson supports the quick and easy idea. The Congress wants the South to be punished. And that's a problem when those two views are so radically different from one another. The question comes up is whose vision will be followed? Is it going to be Lincoln and Johnson's, or is it going to be the Congress's? We'll get a little bit more into this tomorrow, but part of the problem is that Andrew Johnson is not just a Southern Democrat. Andrew Johnson is a flaming racist. He is also an alcoholic, and he is also incredibly paranoid. Johnson grew up in extreme poverty, not dissimilar to Abraham Lincoln's, to the point that Johnson never had any education, and in fact only learned to read and write as an adult when his wife taught him. This always made him very self-conscious, and he always felt that other people around him were always judging him and looking down on him because he wasn't as, educated and literate as they were. This made him very disagreeable and grumpy. It is also one of the reasons why he drank too much. And when he drank too much, he tended to get a little bit squirrely, which caused problems. So when the Congress, within a year, let's say, a year or so, pretty much every single Southern state, with the exception, I think, of Texas, had come back into the Union. The problem is that they took their oath of loyalty. They abolished slavery. That was the 13th Amendment officially abolished slavery. But the Southern states weren't really taking it seriously. In the mind of the Northern Republicans in the government, when slavery was abolished, the blacks were now citizens. They had the right to vote. Everything would be peachy keen. The Southern states didn't look at it like that. The Southern states are like, well, yeah, they're not slaves anymore, but that doesn't mean that they're, get the right to vote. They're not citizens, or they're just free people living here, kind of like resident aliens. So to deal with this, the Republicans threw out every Southern state that had initially met the 10% plan's requirements and made them all come back in again under a new set of requirements. This set of requirements was much harsher and much more difficult to meet the outcomes and the goals of. The Congress saw the passage of 3 new amendments to the Constitution. The 13th officially ended slavery. Now, that really wasn't a big one to sell on everybody. Even the Southern states went along with this to get it over with. The 14th Amendment is a bit trickier. The 14th Amendment established that the slaves were not only no longer slaves, they were now free, but they were now full citizens of the United States. That the Southern states had limits on what they were allowed to do as far as these new free citizens. Like they couldn't impose unnecessarily harsh laws or penalties on them because they had been slaves. It also stated that the war debt had to be repaid, but just the Northern war debt. And it was primarily the responsibility of the Southern states to fork over that money to pay off that Northern war debt. And finally, that anybody who had been in the Southern governments, that's the Confederate States of America governments, could no longer be elected to political office. Well, this made things really difficult because those men were the ones who knew how to actually run the government. And by disqualifying them, it really brought in a big vacuum of who's going to run the government, what's this going to be. This led to a lot of abuses that we'll talk about tomorrow, and a lot of animosity between Southern whites and the newly freed slaves. And because of all of these restrictions, the 15th Amendment officially established voting rights and requirements for the former slaves. In order to deal with all of these states that had been again removed because the South was going to be punished according to Congress's vision, the South was divided up into military districts, each under the command of a general who oversaw them and ruled the southern state through military law. This did not sit well with the Southerners, which I think you can understand. And they um, they responded by not necessarily good ways. It led to the development of a secret society in the South known as the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK. So here's a picture of the Klan. Oops, I think I gotta. I can't get that picture. I'll have to post the picture later. The Ku Klux Klan. Let me see if I can get the picture up here. Put it over here. It's not going to let me. Oops, let me go backwards. The Ku Klux Klan was a secret society that originally developed as sort of a boys' club in the South for former Confederate soldiers. Some Confederate leaders quickly saw the opportunity that the Klan would provide as a way to fight back against what they perceived to be the harsh rule of the North. And to be fair, the Northerns, like the Northern government, was being pretty jerky. Anytime you have military government, it's not going to go well. So, under the direction of a former Confederate general named Nathan Bedford Forrest, the Ku Klux Klan shifted from a boys' club that wore silly outfits and did secret handshakes and stuff into a terrorist organization that took a lot of its beliefs and a lot of its practices from groups like the Masons. They had secret handshakes. They took blood oaths. They had requirements to be a member. And in order to fit in the Ku Klux Klan, which, by the way, the word Ku Klux comes from a Greek word meaning circle or ring. So it was essentially a secret terrorist organization. And in order to be involved with it, you had to learn all these secret passwords and take these oaths and agree to follow the goals and the view of the Klan. The people who, and to be fair, the Ku Klux Klan didn't just hate black people, they hated lots of people. The Klan were really just a group of severely racist men who saw an opportunity to exploit the newly freed blacks through fear. They dressed in white robes to symbolize the spirits of the dead soldiers who had fought for the Confederacy. And they had a very strict program of like, you had to know a bunch of like secret passwords and handshakes and stuff in order to be in the club. And they exerted a lot of power. They used fear to intimidate blacks into, and not just blacks, also Northerners who came to the South for various reasons. And they really became the sort of power base in the South. It was a reaction to the decision to run the South through military dictatorship. The Klan hated blacks, obviously. The Klan also hated immigrants. The Klan hated Catholics and Orthodox Christians. They hated Jews. The only people that they liked were white people from Western Europe who were Protestant Christians. This is the acronym for this is WASP, White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. So if you were a Christian from England or Scotland or not the Irish, unless you were Northern Irish, because they were Anglican, or German or Scandinavian, you were fine. They didn't like you if you were Irish Catholic, if you were Polish, if you were Russian, if you were Greek or Italian. None of those people fit. It was only a small section of Western European ancestry that was acceptable to the Klan. And the Klan would stage these rallies and do these horrible things to intimidate people that eventually led to them killing people in order to like use fear to get what they wanted. Um, the Ku Klux Klan also rose up because of the fact that with the military rule of the South and the 14th Amendment not allowing former Confederate politicians to be elected, blacks now became the government in the South. And the problem is that even though they were in the government, many of them were unqualified because they were uneducated, which led to them being exploited by some very ruthless and very cruel profiteers from the North. These people had a name for them. Northerners who came to the South to try to run Reconstruction and to make money off of it were referred to as carpetbaggers. And the Klan hated them too. The only people the Klan hated worse than the carpetbaggers and even worse than the blacks were a group of people that they referred to as the scallywags. The scalawags were Southerners, white Southerners, who went along with Reconstruction or who voted Republican or supported blacks' rights. They were like the lowest of the low for the Klan. And the Klan targeted these people, and it became such a problem that there was actually almost open warfare in parts of the South between the Ku Klux Klan and um, the government and the military and the general people around them. The vast majority of white Southerners were not Klansmen, but they were resentful of the way that they were being treated, especially after many of them had gone through the trouble of meeting the requirements in the 10% plan. And they were also resentful of the fact that many of these uneducated former slaves were now the ones who were being put in charge of the government and really being exploited and really it was the South being taken advantage of. So this is where we're going to stop for today. We'll pick this up tomorrow. If you got any questions, feel free to ask them. But this is basically what we covered today. Peace and love.